Welcome to Healthy Heads and Hampshire's video today. Today we're speaking to Jane. She very kindly came on and spoke to us about the menopause and just some of the changes that women go through as we get older. She's a GP and a menopause specialist. I'll put some links in around where you'll be able to access the video, so you can reach out to her if you'd like to have some support, but equally I'll put some links in there, maybe if you'd like to do some more reading or just to feel a little bit more informed about maybe some of the changes that are happening for you or for a loved one, and you'd just like to maybe know a little bit more about this process that they're going through or that you're experiencing yourself, just so you feel a bit more informed and a bit more maybe ready to reach out and get some more support if that's what you'd like to have. So thank you very much for watching today.
Okay, so Jane, could you maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and the job that you do, please?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Claire. Thank you very much for inviting me to come and have a chat with you.
You're welcome.
So I'm a GP, and I've been a GP for about 17 years. I work down in Cornwall, and I'm delighted to talk to you about my very favourite subject, which is women's hormones, specifically menopause, but everything to do with women's hormones. So I've got more and more interest in that over the years, and I currently work in the local contraception service and in a menopause clinic locally in Cornwall, and I still do some GP out of hours as well. Lots of teaching and all sorts of stuff like that.
And could you tell us maybe a little bit about the menopause and some of the terms that it might be useful for people to know? Because having read a little bit about it, there's quite a lot of terminology involved in what the menopause really does mean.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Do you know what? The terminology is rubbish. It's not user-friendly at all. So the first thing I'd say is don't get worried about it. As a woman, if you think your hormones are changing, they're probably changing. And if you're any age after 35, then it's very likely that's because the perimenopause is starting. So perimenopause is the bit leading up to your last period. The average age for the last period is about 51 and a half. But for many of us, we don't know when our last period is because we've either got the pill or we've had our wombs removed, or there's all sorts of reasons why we wouldn't know that. So it's a bit of an old-fashioned term, to be honest. Post-menopause, when you haven't had a period for a year. So when you say people talk about being menopausal, what they really generally mean is I'm feeling really rubbish and I'm aged about in my 40s and 50s. But what it means to you is very individual, and if you know something's changing, then you need to find a word that helps describe that. But most people will understand what menopausal symptoms are. Yeah. I hope that helps, but it's a muddle and it needs sorting.
Yeah, it seems to be a very big umbrella term, and people seem to have certain ideas when they think about the menopause and certain kind of stereotypes that they've attached to it.
That's right.
So it's a place to start, at least, in terms of describing what's happening to somebody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What made you first interested in kind of working with the menopause as more of a specialism?
So so as I started being a GP, I was still in that phase where there were more male GPs than female GPs, and women would choose to come and see me about women's issues, and I thought, well, I can obviously be most useful if I get good at that side of things. And then the more I got interested in it, the more I realised that actually it was fascinating. And for me, I've always been much more interested in how the mind and the body works together, rather than just the sort of, mechanics. I was never going to be a surgeon. I was always going to want to understand people and chat to them. And actually, so much of women's health is about that, because the hormones affect our mental well-being so dramatically for many of us, that it's just such a fascinating world to be in, really. So there's something about being able to be with someone and understand what's happening for them physically, as well as the effects it's having on their emotions and their mental health. Yeah, that's right. It's very much a talking specialty, menopause, and it really lends itself to having a chat. So during the lockdown, I've really noticed how the chats I've had with women online have been really authentic chats. People are much more relaxed in their own homes. They're sitting on the sofa with a cup of tea, rather than they've battled through the traffic and they've got lost and they couldn't find a car park space, and they arrive in the clinic and they're feeling really flustered, and we spend half of the consultation trying to sort of get them grounded down so we can really get to what's going on. But it's lovely to be able to talk to people when they're already feeling empowered and ready to tackle the chat, really. So yeah, we get into all sorts of nitty grits as well, because people seem a lot more comfortable about talking about intimate stuff at home as well than in an unfamiliar environment. Yeah,
so you've really kind of noticed that difference that's been created.
Yeah, I've really noticed the difference. And my GP practice started doing phone calls must have been 7, 8, 9 years ago even now, and even then I noticed that women would be much less shy about talking about like sexual issues, but it seems to be that, I suppose, as everyone's got more used to talking about things remotely, particularly in this steep learning curve we've had the last couple of months, people have got more and more relaxed about chatting. And because this kind of issue is very much about trying to work out what's really going on, and we don't particularly need clever tests or clever examinations. It's all about listening to the story. You get a great story, and I think that in itself helps.
Yeah, I can imagine if someone's in a position to feel relaxed enough to give you a more honest account of what's happening for them physically and emotionally, then you're going to have more to be able to work with to understand maybe what their needs are.
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine it must be similar in your role as well, Claire. But yes, it's lovely when people can get through the shyness and the stress and just start giving you a bit of what's really going on. It's great to have those kind of discussions.
So we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but what do you think the effects are on people's mental health when they're kind of starting to enter into this perimenopause and these menopause stages of life?
I mean, it's really, really variable. So some people, as I'm sure you know, many people just sail through and it's not a problem at all. And my experience is they're often the people who have sailed through adolescence and don't have terrible problems with the premenstrual time of their month, and they didn't have difficulties if they had babies, and they didn't have difficulties postnatally. I have to say it's quite rare, because obviously I get a skewed view because I talk to people who've had difficulties, but you'll know there's plenty of people like that haven't had a rotten time. But it's so they're okay, but for a lot of people it's kind of like being an adolescent, but it's much more dramatic, and you've got so much more on your shoulders in your 40s and 50s than you had as an adolescent. Even though as an adolescent you felt like you had masses on your shoulders, of course you did, but you probably weren't running, well, I hope as a teenager most people aren't running a home. I know some people are, but running a home, trying to hold a job together, dealing with a global pandemic, just things like that. It's just, women have got this real sandwich effect in our society, haven't they? And if I had a penny for every time someone says to me, I'm a coper, but I'm not coping now, I've always been a strong person, and this and this has happened in my life, but there's something different about what's going on at the moment. It's like it takes the rug from under their feet. And I've come to the conclusion it's a combination of many processes that are happening at midlife. There's obviously lots of stuff happening psychologically, which you'd understand much more than me about. There's stuff happening culturally, there's stuff happening with responsibility, but then the bit that I understand is what the hormones are doing to the brain chemistry, and honestly it's complete chaos. So is any wonder that any woman can function when that's happening? I mean, we're amazing what we manage in our 40s and 50s, because if you saw what's going on in the brain you would be astounded.
And I think it's quite interesting sometimes from a mental health perspective, at times understanding what the brain is doing and how little control over that we have, and how much it's responsible for, and how much isn't an onus on us as a personality or as a person, can actually bring a little bit more understanding and a bit of kind of self-forgiveness almost, that actually some of this is neurological. It's not me, it's not it's a neurological pattern that's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. We touched on this before the podcast, didn't we? So it's I was explaining to you how I see this with women who have really, really terrible premenstrual symptoms. So we all know about sore boobs and irritability and wanting to shout at everyone just before your period. But for some people, they have absolute extreme symptoms. And some women say things like, it's like my PMS, but it's on steroids. You know, it's just this is off the scale what's happening to me. And they get to sort of halfway through their cycle and they're feeling quite normal, and then for the last half of their cycle running up to their period, they just change day by day and become completely different and completely out of control and feel utterly debilitated by feeling either very low or very ragey or very tearful. And then as soon as their period comes, they feel better again. And understanding what's going on with the hormones there, you realise there's just this dramatic roller coaster, and it's to do with the fact it's just turning the brain chemistry upside down. So yeah, I think understanding that as a woman can really help, as you say, separate. It's not me, it's my hormones, or as you say, it's neurological. So,
yeah. And I guess sometimes it's working out whether that individual could use some support, or whether that individual, it's kind of natural part of just change. And also I guess when it's a cycle, it's that there might be a point in the cycle where they think, I really need some help or some support or some professional input here, and then maybe coming out of it and going, oh, I feel okay again now, and then it rolling around again, and knowing at which point during that is a good point to reach out. And I think I quite often say with mental health, if you're not feeling okay and it might be helpful to talk to someone, then maybe talk to someone. And you know, there's never like the worst point, or you don't have to get to a really bad place before reaching out.
No, absolutely. And so there's not one approach that's going to work for everybody. Everyone's got to find the approach that works for them. So it might be, I don't want you to think that I think you just give some drugs and off you go and it'll all be fine. It's far from that. It's amazing when the drugs do that. I mean, I love it when people skip back through the door and they say, oh, I feel like me again, this is amazing. That's just fantastic. But you know, there are many people like that, but then there are also many more that we get the treatment right, but obviously they've got to work they've got some really hard work to do around the whole package of getting well again around this time, and getting the hormones right, that part of the jigsaw, or just even understanding what's going on is the treatment. And then they've got to see someone like you, and they've got to go on some mindfulness training, and they've got to do some yoga, or they've got to do whatever it is they need to do to pull the whole thing together. Yeah.
And I guess speaking about that, have you got any kind of tips or helpful suggestions that people can incorporate in while they're kind of watching these kind of things, maybe if they're not quite at that step of reaching out yet? Have you got any suggestions of things that might help them at home?
I would say the first thing is, if you don't really understand what's going on with your body, you use now, before you're feeling dreadful, to work out what's going on. So when things start to change, you will be able to recognise it. Menopause is really insidious in the way it creeps on for many people. So because it's not necessarily a linear process, our ovaries don't just shut down overnight. For some people they do, but for most people it's a linear process. They sort of go to sleep and then they wake up and they go to sleep. So you think that everything's terrible, and then a couple of months later everything sorts itself out and you think, well, what was that all about? And it takes a few years to sometimes work out what's going on. So I would say, get to know what's going on with your body. Maybe, you know, try journaling it, or using a diary, or just bouncing it off friends or family, so that you understand what you're like when you're okay. And I would suggest using, you know, whatever information makes sense to you. So whether it's talking to someone who understands their body, you know, women always used to pass down that information between generations, didn't they? And I love that concept. I think women have have got more shy about that, but how are now becoming less shy about it, which is lovely to see on the internet. I love, if I've seen one picture of a vulva, I've seen a trillion pictures, whereas 18 months ago there were no genitals on social media at all. So this is a really good example of how women are teaching women, and I love that. So know about yourself. And then in terms of tools, I can't tell you what tools work for everyone because it's all so individual. But I do, from a GP's point of view, I do know that there's a really good scientific basis for mindfulness. So we can put our hands in our hearts and say that's not mumbo jumbo. There's some really clever people out there doing some really decent research about it, and it really, really works. So that's something I can definitely endorse from a medical point of view. I love yoga. I found that to be a really, really helpful coping mechanism, and I know that's not for everyone. I love Ruby Wax's book where she said if she hears someone a friend of hers tells her she's done yoga, then she's dead to her.
So it's not for her.
It's not for her.
Not for her.
She doesn't want to associate with anyone who does yoga. Fair enough. It's not for everyone.
No.
I think it's really interesting and an absolute lifeline. But sport, running, you just got to find what works. If it's large amounts of Netflix and chocolate, that's fine. If that's what it does it for you, you've got to just do it. But just look after yourself, really.
Yeah, so there's something in there about learning kind of your own body and learning yourself, and also finding ways to communicate that with others. And even if it's starting with friends and family, and certainly I find if I talk to my friends, it really helps me kind of either normalize or understand maybe what's a bit different and maybe could do with talking to somebody else about. But certainly there's some real help in speaking to other people about something that I might be uncertain of. If I speak to a friend about it, I can maybe say, oh, hold on, there maybe there's something a bit more in there, or maybe they've experienced too.
Yes, and I think with women's health, that's really interesting how if you're brave enough to be the first one to mention something, you'll often find that everyone else is dying to talk about it but has been too shy. So I was sort of trying to think of a polite way of saying it. I was sort of the itchy vagina doctor when I was the local GP, because I was really enthusiastic about making people more comfortable in their genital area, and it's actually can make people feel a lot better, because I ask the questions about are you uncomfortable, does it hurt when you have sex, and can you ride your bike, and all of a sudden people go, oh, no, and they tell me all about it. But because I worked in a small rural area, I could tell that people who I knew were friends and neighbours were all having the same trouble, and they weren't talking to each other, and that is beginning to change. The conversation's beginning to get out there, but I think once women start talking to each other about these more intimate issues, then they will find some support. It's not everyone's cup of tea to discuss their vagina, is it? But I think more people are finding they can.
I think even for those people that find talking about it in that way difficult, there's sometimes a bit of way. I was going to say beat around the bush, but it's probably not the best of expressions. But sometimes there's a way to work around the terminology and find the language that fits and feels comfortable enough to open up a dialogue at least to begin something. Yeah. And even if it might be a small conversation and then back away, and then they can work out how they actually feel talking about that. But at least there's an opportunity to start something.
Yes, and that's where social media can be so powerful. I watch women supporting each other online, and I love to see it. I just love to see the wisdom that's being passed between people, and they don't need a doctor to wade on in and start imparting wisdom. That's the old model. They really, really don't need that. Women just need the encouragement and the support, and maybe knowing where to start with some decent information, and then the real strength is when they teach each other, isn't it?
Yeah. So do you have any kind of mental health or menopause, I use the term heroes, but specialists, or do you have people that you've kind of learned a lot from, or you'd recommend people maybe could do a bit of reading about if they've got interest in learning more?
There's so much online now, it's brilliant. I would say that for me it was the British Menopause Society, who are a sort of scientific society of healthcare professionals, were the people that showed me how to get into this specialty, And you'll probably, well, I don't know if you'll remember, Claire, but there was an HRT scare about 15 years ago, and they really kind of helped keep the menopause world going through all of those scares, because there was the science was questionable around that time with regards to the research, and so they really kind of held on and kept going for all those years, and now it's really really taking off again, and people are being able to understand what's going on and being able to be treated if they need to. So you've got to have those academics behind it all, really, for something like medicine. But you asked me about where could people go for reading stuff. You might want to go there, read all the papers if you're feeling really nerdy. But if you want to read some stuff in normal person's language, go to please go and have a look at the Rock My Menopause website. So that is a website that was launched last May, and I was one of the GPs who was behind that, and our idea was we wanted to help women to understand what's going on in menopause and then support each other. And then we've got a closed Facebook group, which is there's at least 2,000 people in that, and it's really active, and we keep an eye on it just to make sure that there's nothing kind of dangerous being passed around in terms of information, which I think is important, in terms of people advising people things they shouldn't do, but largely we just steer clear and let the women do what they do best, really. But there's loads of information on that website, so lots of leaflets and downloads, and there's some podcasts coming soon, so it's a good starting point.
Yeah, I've looked at it and I found it really easy to kind of navigate through for someone who hadn't kind of looked into it from that side before. I found it very useful. Are there links to the Facebook page on the Rock My Menopause website?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, did you find them when you looked on there?
I can't remember, but what I might be able to do is after we finish talking, I'm going to put a link to Rock My Menopause on, but perhaps we can put a link to the Facebook group as well if that's something people are interested in joining.
It's dead easy to find. Yeah.
Okay. So how could people get in contact with you if they'd like to maybe speak to you about working online together? Because you're outside of Hampshire, but because we're in this world where we can work online at the moment, and people are finding that sometimes helpful to have a bit of a screen gap. How could people maybe find you to reach out and maybe work with you personally?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is don't overlook your own GP. So if you know what's going on with you and you know this is linked to your hormones, go on the Rock My Menopause website, get yourself fully up to date, and you can even download a template there which basically is all the things your GP needs to know for you to go and then have a chat with them, because GPs are massively under pressure. I understand. I am one, and I'm married to one, and it's just nuts out there, really. But we're here to help you. So you don't have to go and spend lots of money going to see somebody privately if you know that you can access your GP locally, or if you've got a good service. If you'd like to come and see me online, I love nothing more than to natter to people about their hormones, and we can get you sorted. There are lots of specialists like me around, and we are all collected. I mentioned the British Menopause Society. So the British Menopause Society has a database of accredited specialists. We have to be really highly qualified to get onto that list, and then we have to be sort of vetted by all these specialists on top to be allowed onto the group. So you know that the people that are on that group really do know what they're doing, and I wouldn't go for people that aren't on that group necessarily because they haven't been through the same vetting process. But you've got loads of those around you if you want to see someone face to face. But if you want to see me, look up Truro on there, and you'll see that I've got a couple of clinics there, and I'd be really happy to book an online appointment with you. So
I could put some links in at the end perhaps as well, so people be able to maybe find that a little bit easier. We're trying to hopefully make support a little bit easier, which will be good. Okay, well, is there anything you think we haven't spoken about that it might be good for people to know about, that people coming into this for the first time, or people that maybe haven't really got much knowledge around the area? I think there's anything that we've missed that comes up regularly for you?
I would just say that if you like to read, if that's the way to find things out, this is the book I'm reading at the moment, The Menopause Monologues. cried when I first read this book, because it's people just telling their story, and this just wasn't out there even last year. People weren't honestly telling their story about what goes on, and it's not gory, it's actually quite funny, a lot of it, you know, and poignant, so that's lovely. There's an awesome book called Me and My Menopausal Vagina. You won't find many books of that title around, and
I love the cover of it. It's fantastic. I didn't quite get it to start with, and then I started reading. I thought, okay, now I understand the cover. Yeah, there's something about that cover of that book.
Here we go. Yeah, this is Jane Lewis's book, Me and My Menopausal Vagina. It is unbelievably brave that this woman wrote an entire book about her sore vagina.
Yeah.
And she's so honest. I saw her being interviewed. I listened to her being interviewed on the radio, and she said she's not been to university. She's certainly not a writer, but she felt it was important to write this, and her family helped her, you know, get it up to the stage where she could publish. And I think it's now on its third print run, and she only released it last year. So it just goes to show. And when I go to conferences, and when I talk to women who aren't medical, her little business cards that I carry just because I think she's great, they fly off the table. That and my supplies of free lubricant fly off the table. So this tells me a lot about what's going on for people. Louise Newson is a menopause rock star. So Louise is just fab. She's a GP, and she's all over the internet. She's got loads of podcasts, YouTube, leaflets, everything. And Louise wrote this fab book, which is in a Haynes manual. And I think that's a really, really good first go-to if you like reading. And if you are interested in CBT, this might be you, Claire, you might be interested in that. So this is managing hot flushes with CBT rather than with medication. So yeah, there's loads. I'm very nerdy. I love reading books, so I've got absolutely stacks. But they're all the sort of recent ones that have been really, really good. So
well, that's why I think it's great if people have got places to start, because sometimes if you just were to Google something, the internet's fantastic for finding resources, but it's so varied and so wide that finding something that clicks with how you want to bring in information, that can be a bit harder. I quite like things with a touch of humour. I find them, you know, a little bit easier to take in when you're taking in really difficult subjects. Sometimes having a little touch of humour there can make that easier to take on board.
One more book I've just thought of for you, Claire, is I've just downloaded it. It's Because of the Hormones. I think it's quite new, and it's a very brave book about depression and the menopause. And I read a sample of it, and it looks really, really good. So I'll let you know how I get on when I get through it.
So that's maybe one for people to look up as well. That sounds like interesting. I think as well, I'll be looking up as well.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I just wanted to say, Jane, thank you so much for your time today. I think it's been really lovely for someone, especially, there's something about sometimes when people think of a GP, there's some, unfortunately at times, people feel it's very formal. It doesn't need to be, and I certainly know it's not a lot of the time. I think people bring that idea of it being very formal. So I think it's been really nice to be able to speak about something that's such a difficult subject, but actually speak about it in hopefully in a way that people can really hear and attach themselves to a little bit. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today.
No, thank you very much for inviting me, and it's been good fun.
Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Okay, bye bye.